Hello, I'm Dr. Tom Mowell with Rampart Professional Solutions. We are a coaching and editing service that can catalyze your academic success. In this video, I'll be talking about validation strategies and ways to increase the reliability of your qualitative research project. Now, these terms, validity, reliability, they're not always the terms that are preferred in qualitative methods. They are themselves drawn from quantitative approaches and before that from the hard sciences. So some people prefer terms like credibility or dependability or trustworthiness or integrity. They're all relating to the same kind of concept. Go with the wording that you prefer, or even better, with what your advisor prefers. For this purpose of this video, we're just going to talk about them using their original language of validity, reliability. Validity addresses whether the information you have collected matches what it is meant to represent. See, somewhere out there in the world are the actual feelings, the stories, the cultural practices, the facts of the case or the people or the group. Does your text, as you've collected all this material that you have reduced to some form of text, does it match that reality that is out there somewhere? And similar to this, would another person, another researcher, have collected the same information that you did? The term I'm going to use for that is reactivity, because it's aiming at how did you interact with the participants to potentially change the information you collected. The other concept, reliability, in the quantitative world refers primarily to measurement. In qualitative terms, rather than measurement, what we have is interpretation. You, as the researcher, are interpreting the information and then drawing conclusions. So the question for reliability is, would other people looking at this same information that you have collected, would they reach the same conclusion that you did? So we'll talk about some common ways to increase the validity and reliability in a dissertation or your other work. Some strategies for validation, and these begin actually with your research design itself. The first way to increase the validity of your study is in the participant selection. Do the participants represent the range of experiences that you are examining? If you're doing an ethnography, have you selected participants so you will have an engagement with the full community, all the people or enough of the people to capture what is happening? Or are you only looking at a portion of it? Some members of the community, but not others. If you're looking at the example I've used of a wildlands fire crew out there for the summer, are you, for some reason, only talking to the men or only talking to the leadership of the group, or vice versa, and excluding the actual worker, the people who are on the line fighting the fire, or women in the group, or members of different minority groups? You need to represent the full community to get a valid understanding of its full culture. In a case study, you need to be sure that your participant selection, your research design, is aiming at collecting the full range of sources available. The different kinds of people who have an insight into what happened in the case, but also all those written materials and other types of documentation that you can use to establish what happened in this case. In a narrative or an IPA, obviously the participant, him or herself, represents his or her own range of experience. But are those participants that you selected typical of the group that you are looking at? If you have any interest at all in transferring your findings to the remainder of the group, or to people who are members of similar group facing similar situations. If you're only talking to women, for example, quite possibly you can only transfer what you've learned to other women in the group or to other women in other groups. Then that may be fine. That may be your research design, but be sure that you are representing the full range of experience. A second element of the research design that improves validation, and this is one where I see a lot of students kind of shortcutting this one, is having extended engagement with your participants. In other words, taking enough time to build trust and to build your own understanding of the situation. So you need to leave time in your interview, to follow up with questions during that interview. If someone says something, little divergence from your script, to make sure you understand what they're saying. Taking the time at the beginning of the interview to build some trust, build some rapport, put people at ease, not just jump straight in there with, okay, tell me all about your deepest feelings about this particular thing. It's not likely to get you very good information. Leave time for a second interview, certainly with a narrative, but even for phenomenology, you may wish to be able to come back to the participant and look for elaboration on some things that maybe you realize you didn't capture completely. Even quick queries, an email or a phone call, can you elaborate a little bit more on this, can help you have that extended engagement. The other element of this extended engagement is trying to adapt to the problems of reactivity and positionality. Is your presence as an observer, especially, is it altering the information collected? You're observing a classroom. You're observing some people at work. Is your presence a distraction? Are they perhaps doing things differently because you are there than they would be if you were not there? And this interacts very much with positionality, because while the mere presence of an outsider may change what people do, it's especially true if that outsider is in a position of some kind of authority or perceived power over them. If you're a principal wanting to look at your own classroom, you're probably not going to get exactly the same behavior in the classroom that you would have, that happens when you're not there. So extended engagement allows your presence to become a little more normalized, and it allows the fear of positionality to perhaps go away over time. So in your research design, you want to increase the validity of your study, be careful about your participant selection, and have extended engagement with your participants. Then as you do the analysis, there's two strategies that are very common in qualitative research. These are member checking and triangulation. Member checking is where participants get a chance to take a look at your summary, your analysis of what you have taken from the interview or from your observations. Some people use member checking in a bit of a superficial way, where they will record the interview, have it transcribed, and then send that transcript to the participants for verification. Presumably, and if there's a problem between the recording and the transcriber, you have picked the wrong transcriber. That's going to be correct. What you need member checked is when you took that narrative and you're now boiling it down into the linear summary that you are going to be talking about, do they think that's right? Or when you're talking about the general story as you're introducing the participants, does it fit what they would agree that they believe, what they perceive? It's also important to take notes on what you believe is meant and verify that with the participants. The other strategy, triangulation, is probably the most commonly described verification validation technique in qualitative research, although it is sometimes kind of difficult. Triangulation is checking the information you have received from one source or from one method with what's received from another. This is difficult in an IPA, since obviously the individual is going to be the only source you have for their own feelings, other than your observations of their feelings, and those, that gets a little sketchy to try to decide what they really think versus what they're telling you. In a narrative, it's also difficult. Perhaps there are prior writings that you can check against the narrative, or there may be certain objective information if you have some reason to think you want to make sure that, yes, this person really has been employed in this work for the last 10 years. There may be an employment record or something that you can check on. How long have they really been in school, or other details. In ethnography, triangulation primarily involves checking the different participants' descriptions of what's happening and how things work against your own observations of what's happening. Because now here your observations are far more detailed than in an IPA where you're observing facial mannerisms or something like that. Here you're observing people talking to each other, interacting with each other, and you can check that against what they say they are doing. Case study is the easiest way to have triangulation, since you should have many different sources, many different people all talking about the same thing, as well as documents. But here you want to be careful. in looking at those documents. The document is certainly it's an accurate representation of what it says, but it's not necessarily going to be reflecting what really happened. A plan may say certain things are going to happen. Possibly those things did not actually happen, however, so the participant's description may be the more accurate one. Likewise, a report afterwards of what happened. Reports have many purposes, and sometimes one purpose of a report is to make sure the people writing the report look as good as they can. So be very careful and don't be assuming that triangulation in a case study means making sure what people said agrees with the reports. The reports might be wrong and people's observations might be more correct. And so look at the whole collection of evidence. So strategies for validation in research design include selecting a broad range of participants and extended engagement with them. And during the analysis stage, it includes member checking and triangulation. Now, reliability of your interpretations is an entirely different set of validation strategy. You want to make sure that you are interpreting things the same way other people would interpret them. One way to do that, one strategy, is bracketing, where you are very aware and you make sure you've written down what you bring to the analysis that might be different from what others would bring to the analysis. And where that might indicate bias, the other element of positionality being bias as opposed to power, trying very hard to exclude that, just as another researcher would, so that you might reach the same conclusion without having brought too much of your own prior beliefs into it. Journaling will increase the reliability of your interpretations. Document your thought process as you analyze your information so you can know how your interpretation changes and perhaps go back and decide whether or not you want to have changed that interpretation. Finally, your reliability, or at least the credibility and believability of your interpretations to others, is increased as you write that rich, thick description which provides a trail of evidence behind your codes and your themes. You provide examples of this, and you have those examples in context so that others can read this and say, yes, I think that's a reasonable conclusion that this researcher brought to that set of information. So, this video we've talked about some strategies for validation and reliability. For validation, those include participant selection, extended engagement, member checking, and triangulation. And for reliability, they include bracketing, journaling, and being sure to provide that rich, thick description of what you have learned. Thank you.